The pie was only just out of the oven when the telephone started ringing. I still had my scrubs on beneath a bulky winter jacket, with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar stubbornly clinging to my sleeves. Beyond the window, the snow continued its silent descent. In that particular way Vermont snow always behaves. It drifted slowly and purposefully, as though it had all the time in the world. Inside the house, I made sure every detail was taken care of. My suitcase waited beside the front door, half closed, with a forest green sweater placed neatly on top. Wrapped presents rested gently against the bench in the entryway. These were thoughtful little things I'd chosen specifically for each person. Harold's favorite bourbon, which he always acted indifferent toward, but would finish by the end of dessert. A cookbook that Rowan might genuinely appreciate. A pair of socks with miniature turkeys for Jasper, because keeping the tradition alive matters, even if he never recalls their origin. I hadn't relaxed yet. I was still mentally checking things off my list. I was checking off the last points on my mental checklist when Jasper O'Keefe's name appeared on my phone. "Hey, Natalie," he began, his voice sounding overly cheerful and friendly. It was that specific intonation people use when they're preparing for a response they hope to avoid. "So, here's the thing. Rowan is really sensitive to energy, and with my hours at the hospital and everything, sometimes my presence feels intense to her." I found myself frozen, one hand gripping the pie tin, the other clutching my cell phone even harder. I think maybe, at least for this year, I should skip it to keep the mood light. He delivered the news as if it meant nothing at all. Like missing Harvest Day with my family was just an afterthought. As if it were simply a minor blip we'd joke about in the future. As if I hadn't already arranged time off, wrapped gifts, and baked the pie. I forced down the feeling, sharp and painfully dry, collecting in my throat. "All right," I replied. That was all. About 60 minutes later, my mother, Irene O'Keefe, phoned me. Her tone was thickly sweet, the kind she always used when she wanted something uncomfortable to come across as courteous. "Sweetheart, we're just hoping to keep it simple for everyone," Irene told me. "You know how Rowan can be. If you come, well, it could get confusing. Honestly, we may not even answer the door." I didn't protest. I shed no tears. I didn't ask who had decided I was the one meant to be left out. Instead, I unplugged the string lights I'd draped along the window. I neatly folded the cloth napkins I'd planned to bring, then stashed both the socks and the pie in the refrigerator. After that, I made my way to the kitchen table, took out my laptop, and logged into my online banking. The first thing I did was cancel the automatic transfer I'd set up to contribute to the house's maintenance fund. Then, I put a stop to the monthly contribution to Jasper's account when it was closed. The co-pay for Irene's therapy sessions was also discontinued. Each small supportive thing I did was quietly erased, leaving just my silence. The radiator made a soft hissing noise behind me, filling the quiet of the space. My gaze lingered on the pie, which was still giving off heat, completely untouched. I then slid open a drawer, retrieved a pen and a yellow legal pad, and began making a list. 2017, Leonard's Art Supplies. 2018, new tires for Harold's truck. 2019, deck repair. I continued, line after line. Each year passed, and eventually, I lost track of everything I contributed. But tonight, I resolved to record it all. No one ever forgot Jasper's handmade paper turkeys. Every Harvest Day, those awkward little birds, crafted from colored paper hands and plastic eyes, appeared in framed pictures, family photo montages, and one year as an ornament for winter lights. However, the pie, the one that reliably appeared for every Harvest Day, perfectly warm, eaten up before the dessert dishes were picked up, never lasted long. Nobody ever brought it up. I once believed it didn't matter that love failed to last either. That changed after last night. As I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, holding a mug of lukewarm tea in one hand and a yellow notepad in the other, everything felt different. I began to retrace my steps. In 2016, I took care of Jasper's second month of rent when a freelance payment fell through for him. In 2015, I covered Irene's vision surgery after the insurance refused to pay. In 2014, I bought Harold a new coat. Each line I wrote was slow and deliberate, settling in place like a silent snowfall. Soft at first, but heavy with time. Behind me, the radiator clicked and hummed. I tasted my tea, now cold and bitter, but I stayed where I was instead of reheating it. I remained in place and let the memories return. When we were younger, I remember standing on a small stool next to Irene, helping her peel sweet potatoes for the casserole dish. She barely glanced at me as she passed me another one. The peeler was in my hand, but my eyes were already drawn to Jasper O'Keefe. He sat at the kitchen table, glue sticks in hand, carefully writing names on construction paper cards. He wrote Grandma with the R facing backwards. That made everyone laugh. When I brought home perfect grades, everyone just called it nice and gave me a pat on the back. My report card usually just earned me a nod and a quiet, "Good job, honey." But if my brother Jasper received a participation ribbon for choir at school, my father Harold proudly taped it on the fridge for 3 weeks, as if it were something extraordinary. I can still recall it now. Then she returned her focus to the stove. Meanwhile, Jasper ended up leaving college on 3 separate occasions. At one point, I stumbled upon a sketchbook I'd used when I was in medical school. It contained tiny watercolor paintings and little notes from my clinical rotations, which I had tossed in the recycling bin beneath the old grocery flyers. When I asked about it, Harold replied, "Oh, that belonged to you?" He had thought it was just one of Jasper's old drafts. That, I believe, was the instant that a switch shut off inside me. It didn't happen out of resentment, but because I couldn't understand. Some individuals thrive in the center of attention, while others work quietly behind the scenes. I glanced again at what I had written on my list. 2018. Harvest Day. I made sweet potato casserole. I noted that Jasper had decorated it. I chose not to correct their assumption then, and I wouldn't do so now, though I will always remember. On the morning of Harvest Day, no group message showed up. There were no cheerful holiday presents, and nobody made any last-minute requests for whipped cream or bags of ice. Only snow appeared. Rather than making coffee, I brewed tea, the blend with cinnamon and chamomile, since it gave my apartment a feeling of warmth that I knew I wouldn't experience any other way that day. I left the stereo silent. There wasn't any festive playlist or soft jazz floating in the air, just the steady drone of the radiator and the faint whistle from the kettle. An untouched pie remained in the refrigerator. I left it there, deciding not to bring it out. Instead, I moved slowly, neatly folded the throw blanket across the sofa, and lit a small candle next to the window. The aroma reminded me of spiced cider, though to me, it simply smelled like effort. There was a message draft on my phone from the night before. Something innocuous, wishing everyone a cozy and happy Harvest Day. It lingered, unsent, on my screen. I erased it. By about 3 in the afternoon, the sky had already begun to deepen with a purple hue. My phone vibrated. Marlene Applewhite had sent a message. "Call me when you can." Something happened. I paused. Marlene wasn't the dramatic type. If anything, she was known for her quiet pauses and her famous potluck casseroles. But I dialed her number. "Hello, dear," she started in a hushed tone. "I just wanted you to be aware. Rowan Llewellyn recognized you." I stared. "Sorry?" She glanced at my photograph, the one on the mantel from that birthday event. I must have been around 9 years old, wearing that oversized green sweater. She said, "That's Dr. Natalie Hartman. She saved my grandmother's life." I remained silent. She repeated it in exactly the same way. I said it out loud, and all at once, it felt as if someone had yanked the music from the air. The space fell silent. Forks halted halfway to mouths. I pictured the scene in my mind. The dining room I hadn't visited in ages. Rowan Llewellyn stood by the mantel, cradling a glass of wine. A faded picture of me, with my awkward smile, finally had a place in the room where I hadn't been welcomed for years. After I asked, "What happened next?" Marlene Applewhite let out a breath. She wanted to know if I was the sister everyone always mentioned. I never learned what was said, but she collected her belongings, offered her thanks, and went home. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, Rowan posted a brief message, just a few sentences, no identifying names, about seeing past quietness, and about not forgetting who was there when nobody else cared. By the next day, it had been shared more than 1,000 times. Apparently, Rowan had followers, the sort of people who notice what's not said. Artists, curators, and art world regulars who, like me, had once put their faith in Jasper O'Keeffe's vision. Standing in my apartment, I held my phone and blinked at the display. A message had just appeared. The subject line read, "Let's reset things from Irene O'Keefe, CCD and Jasper." I didn't immediately open it. Instead, I just stared at the bold letters hovering in my inbox, as if they were a life preserver thrown too late to matter. I couldn't help but notice the irony. They said I shouldered too much, that my presence was overwhelming, but everything seemed to fall apart without me, buried beneath the things they refused to face. I kept staring at the email, longer than was reasonable. The subject was, "Let's reset things." It was nonspecific, polished, and unapologetic, reminiscent of a perfumed letter trying to cover up decay. Inside, my thoughts drifted along as always, measured and warm in tone but lacking any real substance. I could hear my mother, Irene O'Keeffe's voice, catch my father, Harold O'Keeffe's, particular expressions, and sense Jasper's indifference threaded throughout. It was as if a committee of my family had convened to achieve harmony. Line after line expressed gentle worry. Everyone had been facing significant stress lately. There was a desire for us to reconnect. I almost went along with it until I read the 4th paragraph. They asked if I could resolve things with Rowan Llewellyn. She's misunderstood certain issues. Jasper O'Keefe, standing among colleagues, is being harmed. There it was. What they really wanted, without any inquiry about my well-being or apology. Just an appeal for me to fix what they had mishandled while I was expected to keep my own reputation intact. Naturally, I eased my laptop shut, much like setting aside a piece of fruit hiding rot within. By the afternoon, the sky outside shifted to that lifeless Vermont gray of November, and the radiator sputtered a warning hiss. I was at my spot near the window, cradling a fresh mug of tea, when another call came through. It wasn't Jasper or Irene. Instead, it was a familiar number from the hospital. "Switchboard, Dr. Hartman," came the voice on the line. "This is Simon Greeley. I'm the administrator who introduced you at the gala last spring." My posture straightened. "Yes, absolutely. Is everything okay?" He hesitated. "I got a message from your father, Harold O'Keefe, this morning. He said he was worried I could be struggling emotionally. He suggested that I might require some time off. Though his words were formal, they carried a personal message." Simon cleared his throat. "To be honest, I don't believe anything he wrote actually needs a response, but I wanted to let you know." I replied with a calm and almost tender thank you. What struck me the most wasn't a sense of betrayal, but rather the surprising stillness inside me, as though the endless wind had finally ceased. After I ended the call, I stayed seated and unmoving for some time. My tea sat there, growing cold again. This time, I chose not to reheat it. I got up and headed to the refrigerator. The pie was exactly where I had left it, completely untouched. The crust was now limp, drooping a bit on one side, as though even it had grown weary of waiting for guests who never arrived. I didn't shed any tears. I didn't raise my voice. I reached up to the cabinet above the sink, took down the storage tub labeled Holiday, and started tucking all the decorations back inside. The napkins, the garland, and the little felt turkey I had picked up at a fall market 6 years ago. One by one, I placed each item in the bin with care, not out of frustration, but with the solemn respect I reserved for things that were once meaningful. Next, I found a small label in my desk drawer, peeled off the backing, and wrote a short phrase before sticking it to the bin. Unused traditions. I brought the container to the hall closet, closed the door, and stood there for a moment, listening to the gentle hum of my apartment. They weren't there to apologize. Instead, their visit was to protect their own interests, and I was finished serving as the support for their fragile version of family. I hadn't been face to face with them in more than a year, at least not actually. Sometimes pictures would pop up in our group chats. Jasper O'Keefe, glass of wine in hand, celebrating at gallery events. I saw Irene O'Keefe beaming next to a neighbor's new puppy, with Harold O'Keefe off to the side giving his trademark partial grin. Still, I hadn't truly seen those images in several months. On that Sunday, I was spared from searching, because they arrived right at my home. It was one of those winter afternoons when the sunlight felt weak, as though it was already surrendering the day. I was seated at my desk, reviewing patient files, when I heard a knock. It wasn't forceful or frantic, just intentional. I stayed still for a moment, simply listening to myself breathe. After a pause, I made my way to the door and peered out. Looking through the peephole, I spotted them waiting outside. There was my mother, Irene O'Keefe, wrapped up in her camel-colored coat, holding a Tupperware container as if she were presenting a peace offering. My father, Harold O'Keefe, had his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his expression impossible to read, while my brother, Jasper O'Keefe, kept shifting his stance as though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted to be there. I pulled the door open just a crack, not to invite them inside, but simply to signal that I knew they were there. I took them in silently. My mother's voice was gentle, reminiscent of freshly laundered linen from a drawer. "We brought over some leftovers," she said, thinking perhaps we could have a conversation. She lifted the container as if it might be the key to opening something within me. I did not respond. Jasper avoided meeting my gaze. He stared down at the floor as if every solution might be written there. Harold O'Keefe gave me a brief nod, which could have meant hello or maybe, let's just finish this, but I couldn't be sure. Not that it mattered to me. I examined their expressions, seeking neither affection nor an apology, just some transparency. What met my gaze was unease rather than regret, calculation in place of grief. Their presence wasn't rooted in any longing for me. They had come because the consequences of my absence had begun to trouble them. That's when a realization finally crystallized for me, one I had danced around for quite some time. You might offer kindness and generosity, be vital, yet for those who see you only in terms of your utility, it's your absence that unsettles them more than your presence. I refused to move aside for them. I made no inquiries about their intentions. I simply spoke the word, no. There was nothing further, no explanation, no elevated tone, just a single word, as definitive and final as shutting a book when its last sentence is finished. My mother, Irene O'Keefe, blinked. Her lips began to part but closed again. My father, Harold O'Keefe, barely furrowed his brow. My brother, Jasper O'Keefe, seemed as if he was about to say something, but stayed silent. I eased the door shut. Then I locked it and walked away. From the opposite side of the door, I first heard their voices in hushed tones, then sharper, and then silence. The gentle scrape of shoes against the mat was followed by the distant echo of receding footsteps in the corridor. I returned to my workstation and took my seat. My tea retained its warmth this time. Opposite me on the bookshelf rested Rowan Llewellyn's letter. Though I hadn't yet placed it in a frame, I intended to, and I might display it where the family portrait had once hung, since some tales are preserved, while others get rewritten. The snowfall had thinned, now barely more than a suggestion rather than a flurry. 3 weeks had passed since Harvest Day, and the town had settled into the peaceful pause that lies between holidays, when a subtle pine scent drifted from every shop front, and each daybreak seemed to come a touch too soon. I was perched beside the window in my flannel sleepwear, cupping a mug of strong coffee to warm my fingers. At last, I had broken the habit of sprinkling in cinnamon. This mug contained nothing but coffee, straightforward and sincere enough. Work had picked up its usual dependable pace. Quiet stretches on rounds tested my patience. During one of those lulls, a patient in her late 80s glanced at me while I took her vitals and asked, "You look lighter, honey. Did something good happen?" I grinned. Not that I had an explanation, just because it mattered that she'd noticed. Later that day, a small padded envelope showed up. There was no sender listed, only my name neatly scribbled in a slightly slanted script. When I opened it, I found heavy ivory writing paper and a letter with ink a little blurred at the edges. It was from my sister-in-law. Rowan told me about her grandmother, how she still did yoga twice every week, and absolutely insisted on choosing her own fruit at the farmer's market every Saturday. Rowan then wrote to me, "You did more than just keep her alive. I helped her feel she still had a place, that someone hadn't walked away from her just because it was the simple thing to do." I sat there and read the letter twice, and then once again. There was no attempt to praise me in her writing. She had written it because she understood me, because for once, someone outside my family had dared to acknowledge the reality. That night, I put it in a frame and hung it above my desk so that the morning sun would shine on the glass, quietly reminding me each day that not all affirmation comes from expected sources. A few days later, my family sent me another email. This message was briefer and lacked the polish of the earlier ones. "We miss you. We never meant for things to go so far. Please tell my sister-in-law to remove her post. My brother is having a hard time. It's damaging his opportunities." There it was again. The apology with a request attached. The sorrow that did not rightfully belong to them. The penalty for being a complication, now measured in bargains and money. I didn't reply. Some silences are not emptiness. There are lines that cannot be crossed. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, but I realize that some things are worth restoring, not out of resentment, but as a tribute to the person I have struggled so much to become. That evening, I drank my coffee in deliberate sips, my gaze lingering on the framed letter. For the first time in many years, I no longer felt compelled to justify myself to anyone. I was done needing anyone's approval to feel like I mattered. No longer did I crave their definition of love to feel complete myself. Beyond the window, the snowfall made the street's boundaries fade, giving every shape a gentle softness, and I murmured something to myself rather than addressing the empty room. That was enough for now, because it truly was. Healing doesn't always present itself as closure. Sometimes it simply means walking away and finally feeling at ease.